What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Sit Down Saturday. We're not going to waste a whole lot of time with introductions today because for a number of reasons. For one, I'm doing this the Friday, a week before the Friday I would normally do this for Sit Down Saturday, so I don't even know what to clean house on in regard to the videos that came out this week. I'm guessing the Takara video probably is going to create a response that I'm going to need to respond to, but until I actually can see the comments and such, I can't really respond yet. Secondly, this video is going to be very long because Maketoys has a very long history and a lot of people have asked for a past, present, and future on Maketoys, so it's time. I get it. It's time. Real quick before we get started, Maketoys itself, the name, right? The name is actually properly pronounced Maketoys. Make, I think in Japanese, it means like demon or devil, like not in a bad sense, but like in a I don't know, yeah kind of sense, like this sort of bit. So what they're saying is like they're devilish, cool, bad toys, but they're also making toys. It's a double entendre. I use Maketoys just because it's what I've always used, but the correct pronunciation is Maketoys. The boss of that situation told me that himself one day. So there it is. And with that, time to go back through time. And the Maketoys story takes us all the way back to 2011 with their very first release, which started the same way many third-party companies started at the time, an upgrade set. Theirs was the Battle Tanker, which was an upgrade set for Reveal the Shield Laser Optimus Prime. It turned into a trailer for truck mode, and then it became sort of an arsenal in robot mode and all sorts of upgrade power armor and all that sort of thing. Maketoys has a fascination with this sort of look. They kind of always have. It's just part of their vision. It's never really done much for me. It's never really spoken much to my sensibilities, but it definitely, you can see here in their very first release, some of their aesthetic preferences. We then start seeing them release 2-packs, and I'm not sure which one came first, but the first one that I remember seeing was their Hover and Bomber. This was sort of a Chug-style take on a Power Glide and Sea Spray, and this is also one of those releases that may not necessarily stand up to the test of time. However, for its time, certainly made an impact and was fairly well received to the best of my memory. But this is way back. By the time that I started buying third party, this was already a tricky one to kind of come by. But it was definitely their next series of releases that really put them on the map and certified them as a company to be on the lookout for. And that was their Giant, which to this day still comes up in conversation. That's how well done it was, not only for its time, but just in general. They released 3 2-packs of Constructicons: Bulldozer and Excavator, Mobile Crane and Dump Truck, Wheel Loader and Mixer. And together they formed Giant. And they also did a box set of Giant later on and actually did something fairly clever where they said Giant Type 61, but the 61 looks like G1. You get it. I know you get it. But to this day, it stands up. It's a fairly well-made combiner and probably one of the coolest combiners, if not the coolest, certainly the most memorable in third-party history. It definitely has a place in the timeline. And of course, you just can't help yourself. We'll get repaints of this as well, but that's kind of to be expected with a Devastator. Just ask Toy World. But the interesting thing about their approach regarding the repaints was they put the yellow versions out first in the 2-packs, and then the green set was the box set, and that came afterward. Kind of weird positioning for a money grab. We've seen MMC do this type of stuff as well. Release a secondary version and then release the primary version later on. But for the time, I think people were just so excited to get a kind of hyper-articulated, well-sculpted Devastator that there weren't a lot of complaints, ironically. And honestly, the box set always had that vibe to me that was kind of reminiscent in a nostalgic way regarding the original G1 Constructicon box set. It always felt the same to me, which I'm sure is by design. Now, 2013 was the year that it's like George Lucas got a hold of this company. Like, they released the strangest things. They continued on with repaints and sort of also continuations on the idea, like their Battle Tanker. We got the Battle Sentinel. There wasn't a whole lot new there. We got the Dagger Interspace Army Commando, which was like a set for Magnus, but still was a remold of the Battle Tanker to homage the Shattered Glass Ultra Magnus. We got the Missile Launcher, which was a set of accessories for the Power Core Combiners. Like, it was just a lot of strange choices, but this was kind of laying the foundation for their Paladin, which was the Fallen, which used the Power Core Combiner kind of technology. And that was a pretty cool figure and different for the time amongst the sort of landscape. To kind of continue with their trailer set of stuff, they also did the Hypernovae, which was like a Hypernova type of release, and this actually was really cool. This was kind of, in my opinion, them utilizing all of the skills they had put together and knowledge they had gained from putting out these releases into something really solid. Now, this isn't the last time that they kind of approached this sort of stuff, but I kind of feel like it was the best they had done up until that point. Those releases kind of ended up making sense, though, because in 2014, that's really the year that, at least in my opinion, solidified them as a company. This is the year, I feel like, where most people go back and start talking about their reputation. They usually start with stuff that came out in 2014. One of those things was the Armageddon Add-On Kit. This was for the year of the Snake Omega Supreme, and it ended up making it look more G1 and was very well integrated, made him look very imposing, and honestly was my stand-in for an Omega Supreme for many years. A really well done set. That was followed up by their Quantron, which was a chug-scaled, kind of giant-scaled in regard to their Devastator. Computron, which was also released in a box set and is really solid and had a lot of cool accessories and gimmicks, like the way the crossbow worked and all that sort of stuff. We got a shattered glass version of Strafe, which they basically turned into the Terracon and named him Ripper. We also saw another repaint of one of their Technobots into a blot that they called Stain, but this one doesn't quite lend itself to the mold nearly as well, especially with the car pieces hanging off the legs. And then we got Trash Talk and Cogwheel, which was their Swerve and Gears, the Swerve heavily influenced by IDW, and is still, to date, one of my favorite, most treasured purchases regarding third-party companies. I love that figure. It captures so much of the character, a really well-done release. They also did the upgraded My First Blaster set for it as well. And then they finished the year off with the Utopia, which was a kind of G1 inspired, but definitely with the Maketoys sort of sauce of a Metroplex. Not big enough really to satisfy a lot of MP collectors, but at the same breath, definitely was an extremely well done thing. And the sculpt was just dead on the money. It was beautiful, had a presence, couple frustrating elements in regards to the transformation, but overall an extremely well done piece. In 2015, we see them make the change over to the Masterpiece scaled stuff, definitely riding the wave of popularity in regard to where the kind of climate was headed in the direction in which they followed suit. We saw them release Cupola, which was their take on Chrome Dome, had a couple goofy elements of transformation, but it had a really big impact, especially for this company making Masterpiece scale stuff. A lot of people were excited. That wasn't their only release in regard to Masterpiece this year, though. They also did a Gundog, their take on Hound, which they did in 2 different colors. And this sort of marks the beginning of the path they ended up taking, which they may have kind of put a stop to, but we'll get back to that regarding Masterpiece. They also did their Visualizer, which was their take on Reflector. There were a lot of Reflectors being announced around this time, but to this day, I still think that theirs is probably the most fun. Unfortunately, it's the one that I like the least aesthetically, but playability-wise, engineering-wise, it was the most fluent and enjoyable. They released another IDW set, which was their Rear End and Hurricane add-on set, basically a tailgate and an upgrade for Cyclonus so that you could make your Chug version look more IDW. This tailgate is a great figure, great sculpt. Once again, the character really comes through. I really miss that they don't do this IDW stuff anymore, but the only problem I have with him over time is the ball joints that connect his ankles to his feet have kind of worn out on mine, so he's a little challenging to stand up, but really a beautifully done figure sculpt-wise and kind of deco-wise. They also began work on their Protectobot set to kind of coincide with their Giant and Quantron. Still, to date, probably the most solid third-party Defensor we've ever gotten, probably the most solid Defensor we've ever gotten, period. Some of the sculpts took a lot of leniency to that Maketoys aesthetic, but you kind of either buy into that aesthetic or you don't, and I think most people do when it comes to making a decision regarding this sort of stuff. Most people kind of know what they're signing up for, and in regard to what they're signing up for, they did this incredibly well. This also marks a point in time when Maketoys and I started speaking to one another because of some criticisms I had regarding their Katana. They happened to share some of the same criticisms and I guess respected my take, so I'll always kind of remember this piece fondly. But their Defensor was a really well done set overall, and still is. And we got another attempt at their Battle Tanker with a Nemesis version with all sorts of chains and capes and madness. 2016 kind of saw a continuation of their practices in 2015. We got more Masterpiece scaled stuff. We got their Despotron, which was their take on Megatron, which I still think is probably the most intimidating looking Megatron that we've gotten in a Masterpiece scale. I love the entire piece with the exception of the head. It's the one thing that throws it off for me. It seems
seems very Dreamwave inspired, and it seems like he means business. It doesn't seem like a joke. It seems like he's going to grab you by the throat and tear you to pieces. And they even included that accessory. They continued with their headmasters, releasing Iron Will, which was their take on Hardhead that seemed to be kind of in line with what they had been doing and had some nitpicks with people here and there, especially regarding the knees, but overall was a fairly well-received piece, and I still enjoy it. Unfortunately, this was the last headmaster that we've seen from them, although they have hinted at 2 others. We also saw their masterpiece, Grapple and Inferno, and I believe with their Inferno, they were donating a lot of their proceeds to the Canadian wildfires at the time, which I thought was a pretty classy move. For those that don't know, that was kind of a big deal in the West, and they didn't have to do that. No one asked them to do that, and they chose to do that. Sort of a top shelf move. And I like the pieces overall. I eventually did swap them out for the Takara ones, but there are things about this that I like better than the Takara ones. I just like the Takara ones better overall. But I think most will agree that hands down their most notable release regarding masterpiece scale was definitely to date their Downbeat, their take on jazz, which many still have in their collection as their representation of jazz, and most are very happy with, myself included. They released their second city bot, which was their Scorponok called Pandanus, and honestly to this day I think it has one of the most strong presence a third-party company has ever produced. It looks wicked. It looks 10 times more imposing once again than any rendition of Scorponok we've ever gotten in the past. It's definitely within the Maketoys aesthetic. It's their vision for sure, but I have to admit that their vision is pretty badass, and the base mode was probably the best base mode I've ever seen for any Transformer ever. That tower, the way it looked like something that belonged in He-Man or something. Like, it just looked wicked. Surprisingly, we got a black repaint of that. Now, obviously, it's the obvious choice to make a black repaint of this character, but I just feel like rarely would a toy with this price tag and this size receive the sort of success that would merit a repaint. But they gave us the black Zarak, and they did one for the Metroplex as well. This is also the year where they introduced their new line with Striker Mantis and Rioter Despotron. They're sort of Cybertronian reimagined versions of Optimus Prime and Megatron, both done in a chug scale, both done with huge liberties taken regarding the aesthetics of the character while trying to stay true to the iconic elements of the character, and also a hard, strong emphasis on articulation. The Striker Mantis is one of the most posable, articulated action figures that can also transform that I've ever looked at. Unfortunately, I don't feel like this line ever had the impact that they wish it had. It definitely has a following and it definitely has fans, but I think that they thought this was going to be the future for them, and I don't think that this line ever performed in the manner in which they had hoped. It definitely comes across as more of a passion piece. And of course, following their Prime tradition, we get a black repaint of that as well, which kind of brings us into the modern era of Maketoys. They continued with their Cross Dimensions line, bringing us a Thunder Mantis, which I had the opportunity to look at and was quite impressed by, to be honest, and I prefer this sort of setup over the Fans Hobby one, and their Divine Shooter. They followed that up with their Jetfire take, which I personally think is one of their weakest releases, and it's too far away from the iconic elements of that character to even feel justified in calling it that character or believing that it's an homage to that character. It's just a bit too far left of center for my tastes. Maketoys did end up in a little bit of controversy though, and that surrounds the release of Galaxy Meteor. And the breakdown of this could warrant its own sit-down Saturday, but there were some discrepancies regarding the pre-orders and the pricing and all of this sort of thing, and it really got the community and the fandom in a bit of an uproar. They did release it though, and it was fantastic. Following that, they released their Howling Meteor, which was a necessary update of a G1 Starscream. Predictably, they followed that up with the Thundercracker and Skywarp, both of which were equally well built. And not surprisingly, they're going to get the Coneheads out of that mold as well. This has led to a crowdfunding situation regarding their Sunstorm, which once again, probably best for another sit-down Saturday, but it is related to a repaint of this mold, and it was crowdfunded. We did get their Contact Shot though, which was their take on Point Blank and their first Target Master, and I believe the only real proper third-party masterpiece Target Master we've received. I hope and wish they would continue with these, as they have teased. They teased 2 Decepticons, Terrorbird and Nightbird, and they teased one more Autobot as well. To close out their Headmasters, they teased their Highbrow and Brainstorm, as well as an Ape-Face, but no word on any of those in quite some time. As for their Cross Dimensions line, I believe the next thing on the docket is their Galvatron, which looks like it's headed headed towards production, and that pretty much brings us to the modern era.
Maketoys has not been very prolific as of late. I don't know what that's about. We know that Moss Toys has a situation with them, and there's money on the line, all that kind of stuff. That's its own conversation, but I'm guessing that that is somewhat tied into it. It might have also soured the pot, so to speak. We know that the Fans Project thing has kind of drifted off from them. We know that Fans Hobby has kind of come out of that, so I think there's probably a fair amount going on within that situation that is responsible for why we haven't gotten a whole lot of product. Where are they going in the future? My hope is that we see some of this stuff they've teased, some of these masterpieces like Target Master, Headmaster stuff. Nobody has been touching that, but I'm guessing the reason why we're not seeing it is because the product cannot sell enough to keep producing it at the level they once were. The characters just aren't that popular, and while you and I may want those characters badly, there's just not enough you and I's. That's what I'm taking out of that. I think that Maketoys has a situation that we should look at where their experience has taught them a number of valuable lessons, and I think we can kind of look at that and see where those experiences have created them to diverge on a different paths. And one of those things for me is probably going to be this crowdfunding thing, but the second thing that's right next to it is this seeker thing. I think we could have a whole conversation on what it means to create a seeker within third party, because it's one of those things, you create one, you get a whole bunch of them, but I feel like a lot of companies end up spiraling down once they start talking seekers, and I think because seekers create exhaustion. You get tired of buying the same mold over and over again. The companies think to produce it so that they can just create molds and 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 molds, but we get tired of spending that much money on the same mold. So I don't think it's as much a win-win as many of them would believe it to be. There's a lot of questions regarding that Sunstorm for me. Why do you need to crowdfund something that you already have the mold for? Like, there's a lot of questions I have about that kind of stuff, but that might be a conversation for a different day. As for today, what I can say is this. Maketoys has put out one of the most consistent, well-done products in third party from the beginning. They're one of my favorite third-party companies. I would just like to see them get back to making the toys that I actually want to buy. See what I did there? Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.